Hello friends, my name is Marines and this is a watch along for the first season of Shadow and Bone. I know that probably right now your timelines are full of Shadow and Bone content and maybe you're thinking, Marines, you too? Yes, me too. But before I get into watching this, I wanted to give a little bit of background for myself and this series. We are reading it for the Snark Squad Discord as our book club pick. We do this a couple of times a year, so we figured we would read the books together and we were going to do a podcast episode on the books, the 5 books that this series is based on. And as that date of recording got closer and closer, like I was prepared to binge my way through it, Nicole and I both got very busy at work, and also we didn't feel like binging through it. Because I really didn't like the first book, and her because she liked the first book fine, and then the second one, like, she didn't like. So we got a little bit stuck with these books not being good. My history is that I read Shadow and Bone back in like 2012, and I gave it 3 stars, and I said that it was fine. And then I read Six of Crows more recently, and I also gave that like 3.5 stars. So those are the 2 Bardugo books, in addition to Ninth House, which I have also read, and I gave that 1 star. So that's my Leigh Bardugo history. We might still record that podcast episode about the books, but for now we kind of put it aside and just decided to do the 1 episode on season 1 of Shadow and Bone. And I figured, why not? Why not record my reactions? I did this recently for another video that we put up on Snark Squad. It's a really fun video in which Nicole guessed what my reactions to the first season of Bridgerton would be. So that video is already up and you can see her predictions for me, my reactions, and then we do a little bit of a chat about the media thing itself. So check out that video if you haven't already. Small plug. But also here we go. Some more watch along content for me as a not a fan of the series who's only read 2 of the 5 books. Here we go.
But now I'm old enough to know the only way out is through.
It's not a big deal. This is not a complaint, but there at the beginning of like a show, any sort of voiceover is always something that I pay like extra close attention to about whether the voiceover is needed or done effectively. And that one was a little like some of the more like feelingsy things about like who she is, where she grew up and her experience, good. Some of the more exposition-y things about the Fold, like it is what it is. That's one way to introduce things. And I'm curious if the voiceover will continue. If it's a continuing thing throughout the show, better. If they're just using it to kind of do the shorthand here up at the top, worse. Part of the reason that I'm looking forward to the show is that I think that it's going to improve a lot of the weaknesses of the book. And it's going to be so funny to see that the show confirms a lot of the weaknesses of the book. And I'm most excited for Mal and Alina to feel like better and real characters.
Someone stole a decapple from a merchant's private residence last night.
Is that so?
Remember, all these kids are 17.
The Fold, oil on parchment.
I know who DeCapel is.
Aemilion Kruger?
And Edge is my favorite character out of
What's
any
her
of
name?
the ones that I met.
Tristan.
The drama. So with an adaptation, whenever you're like watching and talking about it, there's always the piece of it that is the show in and of itself as a contained thing, and then the show as an adaptation and how well it's doing that thing or how well it's expanding on that thing or whatnot. And so it's hard. I was bored by like the beginning of this, and I know that that is an extension of not having an investment in the source material and the front half of this sticking very closely to that source material. So it was kind of like, yeah, this is all the stuff I didn't like the first time around. There's an element of seeing it brought to life that is like interesting, but also this is a very muted show and the visuals haven't been particularly impressive, if you ask me. especially because of the locations where we start. Like maybe once we get to the palace and all that, it will be brighter and prettier and whatnot. But right now it's just sort of like muted. And so you've got a muted setting. Visually, it's kind of muted, and it's a bunch of like stuff that I'm not particularly invested in. It got more interesting once we got to the like sort of climax and we're in the fold and the action of that. I don't think that they needed to spend it as much time as they did, but again, that's with my prior knowledge of the story. So maybe somebody watching this the first time, that was the right amount of world building for them. But I feel like we spent a little bit too much time at the front end going, the fold is bad, the fold is bad, the fold is bad. And then there were like a few small annoying things like, you know, you spend the whole time saying no light, no light, no light in the fold. And then someone goes, and it's like, really? Okay, I guess. Like, we've been here for 10 minutes and I know how bad light is in the fold. And you're telling me that somebody who grew up with this lore and is a soldier, the first thing that they're going to do is like light a match. Like, okay, that took me a little bit out of the story. But a nitpick. Otherwise, like from the middle on, this was a perfectly fine episode. It was my intention to watch more episodes yesterday. I watched one during lunch, but then I had to keep working and I worked late. And then I watched the final episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and we did a live show about that. Spoiler alert for my feelings. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. So that was yesterday. Nicole and I stayed talking as we always do every week. It's our time to catch up. And then it was bedtime. So one single episode of Shadow and Bone is all that happened yesterday. So we're going to try and binge as many as my camera battery will allow. Let's go. I love me some Ben Barnes, I have to admit.
You are not alone.
One of my major complaints of The Darkling in book one, again, I've only read book one, was that everybody, like, they said it would give me charming man in power, and I was like, he barely says anything in book one. He literally just comes out of the shadows, like, 3 or 4 times to like grumble something at Alina and leaves. What he really gives is tall, white, powerful in leather, and people are like, ooh, charming. The thing that immediately made me think that the like TV show would be better than the books is that you have like actors in these roles and they're humanizing them and filling them out in ways that unfortunately I don't think Bardugo did in text. And so we're already seeing the like shades of that with Ben Barnes's, I mean, he's still, you can tell he's got like the murder eyes. I don't think that he's giving a good guy, but he's giving more dynamics than the book gave, just immediately more than the book gave.
Am I a prisoner?
All of Ravka is. Until you and I banish the fold.
That's a yes, girlfriend. It's not a no. That was much better than episode 2. The pacing was much better, and I feel like the integration of the two stories was much better as well. I think the weird like timeline quirk that they gave us in episode 1 didn't really do any good things for the story that it was telling, but now that we're truly getting these two things intercut and seeing that the way that they line up in the timeline, it is much better. So yes, I'm super glad that the few pitfalls of the pilot didn't carry over, and we're making moves now. Don't mind the costume change. I went out and I didn't want to wear what I was wearing, so don't worry about it.
Yes. Oh, so let's get on with it. You know, this is all a bit much.
She didn't even wash her face. Aww. Oh no! Okay, wait, stop. I'm not even a fan of this whole thing, but seeing Leigh Bardugo and like the proud look on her face, it's too much. I got a little teary at that because 1, I'm an emotional wreck, but 2, like the feelings of like her being able to see this thing come to life. Great. We love it. We love it.
You should be training every waking moment to tear down the fold.
People gotta eat. I went from episode 1 being like the crows and the Alina stuff is not integrated well, to episode 2 being like, okay, that works better. Episode 3, I'm so thankful that it's there. The action and the like forward motion of what the crows are doing really interrupts what I thought was like the worst and weakest part of book 1, which is just Alina failing and having feelings all over the palace. So that is definitely like slower pace and not as interesting, especially for like somebody who already knows that part of the story. So the crow stuff is like keeping the pace going forward, which is great. Plus we got to meet Nina this episode, which I really like Nina in the books as well. Nina and Inej were my 2 favorites. So I'm like now a fan. That's where the pendulum has swung of the way that they have integrated the stories.
And to write to Little Palace on my behalf. Before he dismissed me.
The little graphic was out of place. Come on, Alina. Have a little more backbone. Come on, girlfriend. I'm just laughing at the number of times that Mal has survived. Did she go outside in her robe?
Tsar. Moja Tsaritsa. I do hope you're both enjoying the festivities.
I must confess, I'm not bored.
I quite like it.
You have to love
always
the
been a
Russian
certain
influences with the
quaintness about
British
the
accents.
I don't recall this being part of the schedule.
It's always the worst part of the story when you're just watching the main character be stupid. Kissing an old man, Alina.
He'll be able to.
A couple of other things that I wanted to know. I really like sort of the mannerisms that she uses when she's summoning her light, and the way that each of the specific summoners have their own mannerisms. That's kind of like a very tropey thing that I very much enjoy, especially when it comes to any sort of like elemental magic. So that is all good. All of the costuming in that past episode was great as well.
On times like this.
Did I?
The best part is that his sad boy thing is like purposeful and manipulative to win people over, but it wins like readers over.
Let yourself relax.
I will track you down and kill everyone that you love, and then you.
In that case, I take my knife back.
Really, that kill is on that girl. She should have just... I wouldn't even worry about it in Edge. I don't like this. I don't like these odds.
I know you kidnapped my son, Summoner. You should have stayed and cat it down. Mr. Brecker.
Now I appreciate that Kaz bested him with a little flash bomb. Love.
I do like you.
Oh.
Orphans of Karamzin. Reunited. Adorable.
That guy's like, what kind of half story was that, and why is he telling it to me? 2 episodes left, and I am ready to wrap this up. Not a tragic backstory, please.
I know you're in there.
His hair is more innocent now. It's like an innocent hairstyle, you can see.
Memory Agost. I made something.
Sir?
Okay. I don't know how necessary it was to show us like the flashback of the fold being created, because I feel like we got the gist of like all of that information in pieces before. Seeing it was something, but placed here in episode 7, I'm not sure that we needed it. But my other big issue with it is that it happened too fast. It feels very unsatisfying that the fold was created because the Darkling went and read one diary entry. I was like, okay, I'll try that now. Like, sure, I guess, but it wasn't quite what I had in my head, like of what the Darkling would do and how he would behave. So it kind of cheapens it. That's what it is. It kind of cheapens the story of the fold for it to just be like, he went one day and read a diary entry and thought, I'll try that. And that's how the fold was created. But that's whatever. Your mileage may vary. The other thing that is like really annoying about this like little abbreviated backstory is, of course, they gave us the fridging of a woman to include like the tragedy of his backstory. Like, what can make this sadder? I know, we'll introduce you to a woman for one hot second and have her immediately killed. Am I surprised? Not at all. Does it fit with my other feelings about the Darkling? Yes, it does. Did we need it? Probably not. Again, freaking Mal. Just lay down and die, bro.
But now I control it.
People ship this. I have definitely seen antler necklaces, like all sort of romanticizing the antler, the amplifier thing, and I have a feeling like down the line, like, I don't know, if she comes back into her own power and it like is something that she takes possession and power of, like that could be more like empowering for Alina. But the fact that it, like the romanticized version is a necklace, but this is like embedded in her bones, and it just shows how harsh and what a violation this is on behalf of the Darkling. So I think that in this way, and having it really be not something dainty like a necklace, but actually like in her,
And one day, maybe a year from now, maybe 50,
it will stop being
she'll
predatory.
realize that she has only
Oh no,
one.
that's not what he was gonna say.
Make me your villain.
I had this reaction while I was reading too, but I cannot believe, because I had heard that line out of context from fans before, but it is not quite in context what I had in mind from those out of context things, especially because one, the conversation basically goes him going, I'm gonna murder people, and her going, what, bro? And him being like, make me your villain. No, I'm not making you anything. But two, it is like the gaslightiest line in all of it. It is peak gaslight, and people are like, ding, that's my line. Anyways, I feel really bad. Intellectually, I understand why people might like him. In practice, this is so not my jam that I don't actually understand.
Neither of you two survive? Make sure I
The fact that they're just at the back
No
of this
one's dying
boat is hilarious to me.
No mourners.
No funerals.
Honestly, they're just back there.
No heartbeats yet, sir.
Like, just turn around and see them. Okay, at least now they're hiding. I feel better. Inej! This maybe looks a little bit different, but I changed to my other camera so I could just wrap up my feelings now that I'm done watching the show. I am really interested to let this all settle this week and talk to the girls next week for the podcast. So Nicole and I invited Sam from Thoughts on Tomes and Paige from Minimal Bookie to be on that episode, and the two of them are fans of the Grishaverse, and Nicole and I are not necessarily. So I think comparing our perspectives will be super interesting uninteresting. And the reason that I am interested in seeing how this settles is because I binged it, and I'm curious if some of the elements that I did not enjoy will like come up to the forefront more than the elements that I did enjoy. So here's what all of those are. First off, I think that the pilot did have some problems. I think it started off on a bad foot. It hadn't quite figured out the integration of the two stories, and that timeline quirk that it did was completely unnecessary and kind of put a little bit of a wrench into the storytelling. But after that, it did really settle. I think that the rest of this was perfectly fine. And in fact, the integration of the Six of Crows story and the Shadow and Bone, I think was necessary, because the Shadow and Bone stuff, especially from that first book, is so completely, it's like a little bit uninteresting to me, especially Alina's time in the palace is really bland. So you needed the cut in of the Shadow and Bone stuff to keep the momentum going in the story. And there were definitely times where you could feel that these sets of characters were like from two different worlds or stories or whatnot. So it wasn't like seamless, but I think that you needed the integration, or else this would have been less than good. It would have been less than fine. The Six of Crows characters ended up being my favorite, especially Inej and Jesper. But my caveat to that is that Nina and Matthias's story, there was a second there, I was unconvinced at first. There was a second there that I was like, oh, okay. Like, yeah. And then it flips so quickly. Their story was 100% too rushed. The stuff with the Darkling and Mal is going to be personal taste, honestly. I honestly don't know why we have to ship Alina with somebody, but if you must make your choice between those two men, I mean, go with God. I will say that I don't think that anything about these two characters was really materially changed from the first book. It felt like these two characters were the people that I imagined. At first I was like, wow, they're really changing Mal, but by the end I was like, they didn't really change anything. Some people might attribute this to being outside of Alina's head. I don't buy that, because I think that the characterization stuff was not just a quirk of it being like a close first person thing. I think that they were badly written in the first book. The characters they were flat. And I think why they feel different here is that we're getting humans in the roles, right? So there is naturally a better characterization just by being able to see them. That gives them a bit of 3D-ness that the page doesn't. And I honestly think at the end of this, that's ultimately what we saw. How that carries forward, I don't know. Like, will they materially change either of their two stories? Maybe. But for this one, I think Mal and the Darkling are pretty much who I read Mal and the Darkling as in the first book. It continues to baffle me personally that like the Darkling is described as this like top tier villain, because his story is so tropey. There's nothing special about the Darkling. There's absolutely nothing special about him. And as much as I love Ben Barnes's face, he did a fine job, but he didn't bring anything like, I don't know, Loki style to this performance where I'm like, oh my God, charming. Now I truly want to ship you homicidal maniac with our main protagonist. Like, there was not charm there to that level. Just like the main character, I forget their name now, the actress that played Alina, and they did a fine job, but they didn't have much to work with. Alina was very one note throughout this, and they hit that note fine, but it wasn't like, there was nothing here to me that was like standout exceptional. If you ask me, it was all fine. And in fact, some of it was a little bit heavy-handed. There were times that I kind of rolled my eyes at lines, or like how things happened that would just kind of took me out of the story, like them hiding in the back of the boat and just hanging out there, or every time the Darkling gave like another long speech, I was kind of like, oh my God, all right, already, we get it, let's go, let's move this along. One of the things that will stick with me in terms of like the tropiness of it all, and it's a minor thing, but it is going to continue to bother me, is that little like flashback to show us how the Fold was established that included a little tragic backstory for the Darkling. And honestly, the fridging of a woman in that backstory, for why? In 2021, like nobody saw that and was like, hey guys, not only is this like a trope we don't need to play into, but what did that add to the Darkling story at all? What did it add? The Mal and Alina stuff, at first I was more engaged with it because of that, because I was like vibing more with Mal. And I think that, so their relationship is such a linchpin in this. It is like the emotional core of the story that we're telling. In a lot of ways, it's like the plot core as well. And so I feel like, especially for just kind of regular viewers with no context of the Grishaverse who are coming to this sort of the way it's been pitched as like Netflix, like new fantasy series, that might bother them, because it is such a like important part of this is just these two, like Mal, Alina, like over and over again. I was okay with it for the majority of the season, but by the back half, I was like, oh my God, let's move on. And I think that had more to do with repetition than anything else. We kept falling into the same like mini plot cycle, illustrated by the number of times that my boy Mal was injured. Like, he was running into bullets, honestly. Like, it got to a point where I was like, okay, okay now. The look of the show bothered me at the very beginning because I thought it was a little uninteresting and muted. It grew on me towards the end. I don't think that I would say that, again, this was like anything that will stand out to me sort of in my memory visually, but it also didn't do anything criminally wrong. I think it was fine. So the other thing that's a little bit tricky to talk about, and I'm going to do my best, but is the fact that they made Alina half Shu because of the actress that played her. And so I can't speak specifically to the representation. Alina is biracial in this, and I'm biracial, but I am not of Asian descent. So again, I can't speak directly to what was being represented on screen. There were a lot of Alina's experiences that felt like real to me, to things that I have experienced, including some of what, not being enough of one thing or the other, or some of the racism that she faced, or some of the like criticisms of her physical appearance, are all things that I personally, like I said, like they felt very close to things that I have experienced. I saw an interview with one of the writers who is also of Asian descent, who was talking about putting a lot of her own life experiences in that, and like the importance of her being able to see that reflected. And I totally can see that, and I don't begrudge anybody sort of infusing the storytelling with what they have experienced. So it in that context, and sort of, or pulled away from the context of the rest of the story, like I can see that and I can appreciate that, but in the context of the story, it really left me like hanging. Like the plot threads of like her Shu background were just left up in the air in a way that had me questioning like why they were included plot wise, in story wise. So it's the element of like in the context of the story, and not only of the story, but in larger context of the tropes that we often see in fantasy. Like, why could they not have let her exist here without also having to confront racism in this way? And if that was important to your story, or important to what was being told here, I feel like you needed to ground that more, or lead us somewhere, or challenge the racism in the story more. I can definitely see this being uncomfortable for people to watch because of the slurs that were used, and the way that it just kind of like out of nowhere would slap you in the face with this racism and then just like disappear. And by the end of the season, like nobody mentions her being Shu again. So like the heaviness of it at the beginning of the season, and then by the time that we get to the end, it's just kind of gone. It left me asking a lot of questions why. And what I think I'm really trying to get at is that ultimately it felt abandoned by the plot, at least in this season. The further context of the Shu and how they fit into this world, it's just not there. Hopefully I expressed that well. And if you have any other thoughts about that, I'd love to hear them down in the comments, as well as any thoughts that you had about season 1. I think that's all I had to say. I know that after I finish recording this, I will probably remember like one other thing that I had to say, and I'll kick myself for it, but I will get to have all of those feelings on the podcast. So it will take a couple weeks before it gets up. We're recording it in a week, and then it takes us a week or two to turn it back around. But once that's live, I will link it down in the description, just in case you're finding this later. Yeah, so I think that's where I have arrived. This is like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was fine, but not great. I would love to do this watch along style with other things in the future, so hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.